So yesterday I promised to open up question and answers during today's satsang, which we will do shortly. However, before I do that, in order to keep the questions relevant to yesterday's topic, is one of the requests I would make. And so I'll just give a brief summary of what we spoke about yesterday. Essentially, the topic was, does good and bad, pleasure and pain, wealth and disease, health and disease, wealth and poverty, so all of the interconnected opposites, what we would call duality, does that exist unless we label life as that? Because there is merit in coming to see life outside of the set of labels that we place on top of life, especially if that labeling keeps our view of life very restrictive. And so there are particular teachings and methodologies that will instruct us in a way that will shut down certain thinking processes and allow a recognition of life from the perspective that is not that of seeing life through the lens of thinking, which is what has become our standard experience of life. And if that set of pointers does create a shift outside of the thinking, and the awareness that is functioning through us gets to sort of see life directly, we could say, then that reveals something about what we could say the conceptualized experience of life. It demonstrates something experiential. It demonstrates that there is this blanket, this veil that is placed over life, and it's within that veil that the psychological me, which suffers, exists. And so when that veil falls, the suffering falls, the separation falls, the person, in a sense, especially the me, which is this belief in doership and attachment, falls. And so there's great merit in being directed outside of thinking to a registering of life prior to labeling it. Essentially, that gives an experiential demonstration of one of the perspectives of non-duality. However, we can then become convinced that that is reality, that is truth, and that the life that includes thinking is ignorance, and that the thinking has to remain absent all the time. And there's a halfway point or an integration, which is not a reverting back to labeling everything in the old way. It's a reintroducing of thought in a way that allows us still to connect to the self that was revealed when thought collapsed, and allow the describing of life as it appears in experience to continue, where we can see that there are tables and there are chairs and there are others, but remain connected to the deeper aspect of ourself, where we know ourself to be undefined by what happens in the flow of life. And so, in a way, it might be hard to connect to that and know ourself independent of thought if the layer of thinking hasn't collapsed and allowed us to see that there is what a strong role that thinking can play. And then we have to then also acknowledge that certain experiences like biological pleasure and pain, the biological discernment of different objects based on the senses and based on the intelligence of the body, which is not ignorance. We have to acknowledge that that actually does exist, and that certain labeling doesn't have to create a collapsing back into full separation. We can acknowledge duality on a level of experience and remain grounded in a part of ourselves that actually sees the duality as part of a greater non-duality. And to the extent that we think that the pleasure and pain is only there if it's conceptualized, i.e. if we label it as pleasure and pain, we may be missing the fact that the pleasure or pain is actually biological. It arises as a biological sensation, and that biological sensation is going to be there for as long as the biological entity, the instrument, remains. And so to go around saying there is no such thing as pleasure and pain unless I think it into existence, unless I label it, is not absolutely true. The pleasure or pain will arise as a sensation. The differentiation will arise as a result of the intelligence of the body, as a result of the senses. So, but yet we have to, at some point, see how our labeling of reality can prevent us from seeing beyond that lens of labeling. So while that lens is in place, it's very important for a teaching to say there is no pleasure or pain unless we label it as so. Because that labeling is usually not just the labeling of the pleasure and pain in a mundane way, but rather the labeling of pleasure and pain as it relates to the me and what it means to the me. And so the suffering arises. And so that pointer is saying, hey, if you don't label anything, because actually life just is, if you don't label anything, firstly you see it as it really is, and then you notice the suffering falls away, and you notice you know yourself truly. So it's hugely beneficial to stop that temporarily. So with that introduction, hopefully people are familiar with what we spoke about yesterday, and maybe it inspired some questions. So let's go to the questions. Hi, Holger. Hello, Holger. Can you hear me?
Yes, but my video is still turned off by on your side, but it's fine. What an amazing and beautiful teaching. Wow, I'm shaking a little bit right now, so I have to wait a moment. I woke up yesterday and today with a deep fear.
Right.
And yeah, wow. And then I was wondering, and first of all, it was beautiful that I didn't run away from it, like with my usual thinking and whatever I do. And then I was just wondering if I maybe mix up fear and bliss. Sounds crazy, but because my labeling machine, my habitual labeling machine just maybe didn't know the difference between bliss and fear, and then I just looked closer at it, and then it's really wonderful, this teaching, because it just gives me the tools not to to allow things to come close. I mean, not to run away from them. And it's so beautiful. I mean, because this deep fear, I'm not dependent on it. I mean, it cannot touch me in a way because I cannot explain it. But I'm just really grateful for your teaching, and I think I need maybe lifetimes to really understand it in its depth. But it's super practical, and it's wonderful. It's amazing.
Well,
yeah, because I can see how I trap myself, how I separate this blanket of thinking. It's so strong and it's clear to me. And another aspect was also that I felt, oh gosh, I'm addicted to meditating, which is kind of a funny thought. But those were two things. I mean, this deep fear and then being addicted to meditating. And it's just very fascinating.
Mm.
And thank you for your patience.
Well,
and thank you for hammering this into us so that it becomes second nature. That I'm not lost in this stream of pleasure and pain, but that I am really that happiness which is available, which is aware of whatever comes up through my labeling machine, and to just see this mechanism. This is
this is good. There's we're so used to labeling things as we think it relates to us, that if that stops, then even knowing it as fear changes. It's just a feeling, right?
Yeah, I was always so concerned to lose this instrument. I mean, I have some certain trauma inside of myself regarding to dying, because, but whatever the story, doesn't matter. Yeah, the fear of losing my instrument and to miss my chance in this life to discover something, and this just kind of created another form of spiritual ego or something, which actually just separated me from my discovery. It's kind of ridiculous, but and I spent so many years being just frustrated and depressed and not knowing what to do. And just it's such a release. It's wonderful. And then this thing with attitudinal and circumstantial. In a way, my attitude just depends on my identity. I mean, if I identify myself as a separate entity, or if I see myself from the perspective of consciousness, when I'm being willing to, actually it felt like some days ago, it really felt like I'm dying. Because this game, this filter of thinking and labeling just dropped away, and this was the only thing I knew about myself, was just my label. This was myself. And dropping it felt like dying. I mean, it's not physically, but just emotionally, psychologically or something. And this made total sense, and it's fascinating. And to me, this is maybe this Easter thing, like Jesus at the cross. I mean, we have to die to our old ideas, and not the physicality, but just our inner attitude, our identity. And I maybe stop and listen to you. It's much better.
No, I agree. What you're saying is coming out of your own insight. It's very good. It's this is often this idea that we have to die before we die is confusing to people, because we try to work out what that means, and then we hear about the ego dying, and really it's what we've always known ourselves as, dying. And so even this notion of the person has to die the individual has to die. Really, it's the individual that we have known ourselves as, the person that we have known ourselves as. And it becomes very clear when there is a gap in the thinking, which really means we need to be directed to not label, let's say, for some time. Then it becomes very clear that what I've known myself as is the narrative, is the labeling. And it can be very scary, because we might say, when it vanishes for an instant, it's like, who am I without that? Because there's such a contrast between what we're so used to, the experience of being something that is defined by, what they have done in the past and their good attributes or their bad attributes, and defined by outcomes. And so if we touch something that is prior to that, that is, you could say, more real than a psychological identity, it can be scary if we feel that what I know myself has just collapsed. But if there's a grounding into that other self that is more true, then, and we really feel, I am, there is still an existence in this non-conceptual self, in the non-psychological self. There is this undeniable existence in the present moment. So then that's sort of an important thing for us to register. If we feel a fear at the collapse of the psychological self, often there's a fear because what is felt is that I don't exist anymore, because the psychological self sort of dissolves in that moment. And what is missed is the innate sense of existence, the innate presence that really is still very much here. And if attention lands on that presence, the sense I don't exist actually doesn't at all have any space in which to exist. The sense I don't exist just can't arise, because what we find is there is this innate presence and existence. So even if it has no conceptual component to it, no idea of oneself, it's replaced by something much more direct, much more intimate, much more real, which is the actual presence of consciousness, the I amness that is not a thought. So I hope that's something in line with what you were able to realize.
Wonderful. And what about this? It will all come. It's amazing. One little thing, not to distract or anything, but how do you, this picture of the whole, this terminology of Holy Ghost in the Bible, how would you translate it into your teaching? Which aspects? What is your terminology for this? The Trinity in the Bible.
Yeah, well, I think I would say that the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost are, they're described in a way as separate things. They're labeled as separate things, but then, as you know, the Trinity is actually a symbol of three in one, like three not separate. And I would look at it as the Father is the source from which we stem. And we need to realize that, I'm here, I must have come from, or there must be a source from where I stem, where life stems. But that source, to me, is not knowable. It's not something that we can meet. It's essentially outside of the manifestation. So just to know that there must be a source, but not to know it only intellectually, but to have some connection to it. Now, a second ago I just said, well, you can't know it because it's outside of the manifestation. And so in the teaching we often talk about how source at rest, pure potentiality, explodes into manifestation, explodes into creation. And it has to explode into creation because it is pure potentiality. It's absolute nothing, but not dead nothing. Potential nothingness, which explodes or manifests into everything. So source at rest turns into the manifestation. And so the manifestation is what we are aware of, what we can be familiar with. And there are layers of the manifestation that we're not really familiar with. And so the deep aspect of the human being, the quantum aspect of the human being, that which I referred to a couple of days ago as the formless essence, the formless consciousness, is what I would call spirit. And the physical through which the spirit connects and functions is the Son, or the expression of the Father in form. And that's why we are said to be created in God's image. What that means is that the core of the human being is consciousness or spirit. And spirit is essentially the essence of the Father. And so when we see it like this, we see that the connection between the person and the human being that we can know ourselves as and the source, which we can't know, is the consciousness. So in this teaching it says it's the impersonal consciousness of source that links to a particular body-mind organism and then expresses through that body-mind organism as personal consciousness. So based on that description, the impersonal consciousness of source is the Father that connects to this particular body-mind instrument and functions through it as personal consciousness. So what connects that we can become aware of is the spirit, which is essentially the Father in manifest form prior to connecting to the body. And then once it connects to the body, it becomes one. And the Son, in essence, can know its connection to the Father by resting in its own beingness. Prior to us knowing ourselves in this integrated fashion, meaning knowing ourselves as a biological instrument, but with an essence running through us. So the essence, the consciousness, is what we often don't recognize as part of who we are. It's always been there, but we don't appreciate it. We're not aware of it. And so while that's the case, the spirit essentially is something that doesn't feel like it's part of what we are, but we can, in some teachings, it's encouraged that we pray to the Holy Spirit, that we ask for guidance from the Holy Spirit, which is essentially God in the manifestation. And so there is a value in a sense, asking for guidance and imagining this Holy Spirit, which at that point doesn't feel like it's part of who I am, but essentially it's a trust in what we could call our higher self, or a knowing, a deeper knowing, or a wisdom. And when suffering is in place, which means when we don't know ourselves in an integrated way, we feel like we are getting or we need help from outside. And the Holy Spirit is, in a way, a healthy image, a healthy visualization or belief that is, in a sense, allowing us to tap into our own wisdom, but we don't feel it. We don't feel that we have any wisdom. So we say, I'm asking for help from outside. And as we start feeling a connection to the Holy Spirit, feeling like we're being guided, and in various teachings we might be told, don't listen to your egoic movement, the doership movement, which has been driving you in a certain direction all the time, but connect to your deeper truth. And so that deeper truth might be, before doing what you would normally do, listening or asking for guidance from the Holy Spirit, which is really transcending your habitual doership and attachment, and saying, what would be a more wise movement? And so we then might start to feel like we're being guided by the Holy Spirit, rather than continually functioning based on the doership and attachment to outcome. And as that grounds in more and more, at some point we realize the Holy Spirit isn't actually outside of me. It isn't separate from me. There is no Holy Spirit. There is my spirit, my wisdom, that when suffering kicks in, which is this sense of disconnection and uncomfortableness, that's when we lose connection to spirit. We feel separate and lost. And that's when we essentially pray to God or to spirit for guidance. But once the suffering dissipates and we have this connection, we realize I was always praying to my own connection to, so we feel connected to spirit, and then we know spirit is our connection to source. So I don't know if any of that resonated, but that's
absolutely makes totally resonates, and it's really listening to you. And in the beginning, I had a really hard time to warm up to your style. I mean, you pushed a lot of my buttons. But you helped me to just trust, and this is so amazing. I mean, to not always habitually run away through my labeling from this deep fear, because this deep fear was there all the time. And it's just beautiful, and I thank you, and quite amazing.
Thank you, Holger. Very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Isabel.
Hello. I'll try to put the video on. Nice to see you, Roger.
Nice to see you.
It's really amazing, the satsang of yesterday. Really, it was so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And arises a few questions. One of them was about what I was struggling in the moment and how I could put it away. That is when you are hurt. So I think I could realize that as I'm not the doer, the person I think that hurts me could not do another thing that she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Then realizing that helped me to say, okay, I it's just like that. But then after I say, if I never tell her, this person, what was hurting me, then maybe the situation will never evaluate between us two. You understand what I mean? It's just saying, oh,
Sure.
a sort of, okay, it's like that, I just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of me says, so it's independent of suffering. It's really how can things can go a little bit further than what they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my questions. You understand what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. So acceptance and seeing the other as the doer doesn't mean that you won't biologically try to improve a situation. It's just that hopefully the improving of the situation or acting how you would like biologically is not accompanied by a psychological attachment to an outcome. So if you think that you can explain to this person that what they did was not pleasant for you, that it hurt you, and if you can explain it ideally without the blame, then you are essentially delivering new conditioning to the other person, and that new conditioning may bring about a change in how they function, in what they do when they're relating with you. However, we really need to understand that just because we tell someone that what they did hurt us, really doesn't mean that they're going to change.
No.
So if we really understand non-doership, it means, yes, we are delivering new conditioning, but we don't control how the new conditioning is going to affect their makeup.
Yes.
And then that means that I can say it, and I can say it without attachment to outcomes. Which means if they do it again, hopefully we don't get even more hurt because we've the day before explained to them that what they do hurts us, and then we have an expectation that they're different because I've explained it. And then if they do it again, then if we feel even more hurt, it can be that we feel even more hurt biologically because they're doing it again, even if we've told them. But hopefully we don't have this layer of expectation and blame because they've done it even once we've told them.
Yes, that's perfect. So it's just allows me to because in your teaching you were saying you don't have to make any effort, you and I was wondering about that because it asked me sort of effort to tell the truth, in fact, of what happened. That's
yeah. Well, effort means you don't have to do anything in particular. Just allow whatever wants to come out and see it as a happening.
Okay, and then just the question that could go with it, you also said that we have to stop thinking that they are thinking life is with causality. There's nothing of like that, and I was wondering about, okay, if there is no past and no future, and that life is just is, then I have a problem with that and understanding really, because in the same time I do understand exactly what you say when just life arises, but then all the lessons of the past and all what we are, I mean, all we can also take lessons from the past.
Yes,
and
well,
so
the problem in a way is that actually what I was saying is not really what I would say is the truth. To say there is no past and no future is actually a very powerful teaching. And as you've heard me say, teachings are methodologies. So from one perspective, we can come to appreciate that in the present moment, we have no proof of a past or a future. The best we have is a memory. And if we look at that memory and look at it as a thought arising in the present moment, we have to say, I don't know where it came from. I don't know that this memory in the present moment actually comes from the fact that I have lived in the past. If you are really present right now, do you have any proof of the past other than a memory?
Not only from the memory, but from books, for example. That when you read books, for example, that tells you from the past. It's that I don't know. Isn't it that the all the I understand what you mean. You would say that it's only because you have the memory that we are what we are.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you are saying.
I'm saying you have a memory of having read a book, right? You don't know. You don't know that you've ever read a book, actually.
I think I don't understand. I have I don't make the difference. I don't make the difference between the memory that made me go a certain way, that brings me to speak to you now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
You see, actually, so it's a bit complicated because I'm not really putting forward that teaching, right? I'm not really putting forward a teaching that says the past doesn't exist and the future doesn't exist, and that time doesn't exist. What I was describing is that there is a teaching that says that, and it is powerful because, but it's not what I would say the truth. I wouldn't say it's the absolute truth. What the teaching, so if we want to explore it now, we could. So what that teaching says is all you have is this present moment, right? That's what you know for sure, is this present moment. Are you sure that you lived yesterday?
In fact, I would say yes.
Yeah.
I was sure I was living yesterday.
So on what basis are you sure that you lived yesterday?
Because I can see what was happening. It's my memory that tells me that I was living yesterday. That's what you're saying.
Well, no, so I'm asking you what makes you sure you lived yesterday.
I lived yesterday because I remember all what happened, that the sun was going, that I was breathing, that I was doing many things, and
that's right. So
that makes...
Yeah, so it is your memory that brings the past into existence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the teachings that are exploring the very present moment and looking at what the present moment is will say, so realize that the past comes into existence because of an object, a thought object. Memory is a thought object that arises in the present moment. Now, can you be sure that that memory that you have is because you actually lived the experience of seeing the sunrise and having the medicine? Or could it be part of how this present moment experience is designed to create the impression of life as experience of time and space. Could it be that someone is, or something, some creator is creating a creation, and in order to create the experience that there was a past, they will stick a memory in, right?
Okay.
So you have a memory in this moment. The question is, do you know for sure that the memory is there because you experienced the sun rising yesterday?
I don't know. I have to think about that.
Yeah.
I really have it's not that simple. It's not that simple to figure.
That's right. It does take, because we have such a relationship to our experience of life that believes, for example, our memory as being a reflection of truth. That is how we've always related to the present moment. That memory tells me about yesterday. And so what is being suggested in the teaching that asks you, are you sure that your memory is a proof of yesterday happening? Are you sure that it's there because yesterday happened? Is essentially challenging how we have always seen life. And so it's not necessarily easy to let go of our relationship with life. We might need to contemplate this a little bit. If we realize that actually the memory is just an object in the present moment, an object that has a very interesting power over the experience, right? It brings into existence time. It brings into existence the past. So if that memory falls, if in the present moment you are just focused on what is here now, and the memory isn't present, then what you realize is there is no past unless I think about it, which really means unless a memory is present. And so that starts to give us more appreciation of what the present moment actually is. It's an experience, and what we experience is very much dependent on what objects exist in the experience. So we have the experience where there is memory, which creates the impression of yesterday and the past. And in meditation, for example, or if you are being very present with the present moment by looking at the room and focusing on what's here in the room, you notice that the objects of memory can fall away. And then in those periods where there is no memory, you might realize, well, there is no past. There is just now. And if there's just now, then causality doesn't make sense anymore, because we will look at something that is here and we'll say, I don't know really that it's here because it was made 10 years ago. That is what the experience of life has always suggested is what reality is. That, I was 30 years ago, I was a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old. That's what the experience tells me. But if we start questioning whether time is real, we might start saying, actually, I don't know that I came from the past. What I know is I'm here now.
That I can say. I'm here
So if we look at a dream at night, right? A dream is an appearance in consciousness. It's an experience. And the dream character in the dream doesn't really exist except in the dream in that moment, right? The dream, let's say the dream was not happening and the dream world then didn't exist. And then in an instant, the dream world came into existence. And the characters in the dream have a memory of being 10 years old in the past. Now, did they really exist in the past? Because when we look at a dream, they just came into existence in this very moment, in the moment of the dream, the night dream. But the character is experiencing life as if they've been alive for 20 years. And why do they have the experience of being alive 20 years? Because in the present moment in the dream, there is a very important thought, a memory, and it creates the impression that they have been alive for 20 years or 30 years. But actually, when we see the dream from outside, we see they just came into existence. But from inside the dream, they experience the dream as if it is got a past, and as if they exist because they were 5 years old and 10 years old and 15 years old and 20 years old. So from that, looking at a dream, we go, wow, this all these memories and the sense of time and causality is all an illusion that can easily come into existence. We know it every night when we have a dream. This whole dream world is created with a dream character, with a sense of life being real and time and space. And does that make sense?
Yes, so that we could be, or we are part of a dream.
Well, this is a possibility that we have to explore. But, ironically, this is where teaching gets so complicated, because you really have to pick the path of the teaching. Not you, but the teacher has to pick the path, because when you start introducing comparisons between teachings, not comparisons to make one right and one wrong, but to try and show why they each do what they do, each say what they say, then it can all become a jumbled mess, right? If we bring different teachings in, which is sort of what I did yesterday, to try and make some points. If we start to experience, if we get directed to question, is this a dream? Are we in a dream? Because a lot of the scriptures tell us that life is an illusion, life is a dream, life is not real, life is an appearance in consciousness. What we are is consciousness. So if we use the night dream example, and we see that a night dream is an illusion, it is a creation, it is all happening in consciousness, that the whole dream world is really made of the consciousness of the dreamer. The dreamer is the creator of the dream. And the whole dream arises within the consciousness of the creator, and the dream is not separate from the consciousness. The consciousness is what is aware of the dream, but the consciousness is aware of the dream because it connects to one of the instruments in the dream, and it experiences the dream from the perspective of one of the characters. So the night dream is a creation in consciousness, a temporary, momentary experience that we can start to understand. And then we start to maybe listen to what the scriptures, different scriptures tell us about life being a dream, and we might start to really look around and say, could it really be that we are temporary dream characters in a consciousness that is, in a way, outside of what we are? We are just objects inside, let's say, the consciousness of God. And if we get pointed to investigate our very daily life experience, what we're having right now, we may have some awakenings to the nature of what life is, because life really is an experience. And in order for there to be experience, there has to be consciousness. And our thinking of life as past and future and labeling everything as real and objective can prevent us from recognizing certain aspects of the life experience that teachings can maybe direct us to realize. So there's a reason why a teaching will tell you, there is no past, there is no future. Causality is not really how everything happens. You are not the body, you are consciousness. It's saying all of these things to bring us into the present moment and question our assumption of life, and maybe get those assumptions to fall away.
That's great. It's always when you talk, being on the edge of something. When I listen to you, I say, it's there. You see what I mean? I will listen again. What you always bring up. It's great.
That's good. Let me also say that I don't think the point in the end is not to realize, or I'm not really saying life is a dream. Actually, I'm not.
No.
In the end, we can go through certain explorations that are very important. They reveal aspects that we haven't seen before. And even if life is a dream, we can't jump out of the dream. Imagine if you realized you were a dream character, the dream character at night, in a night dream. If it realized it was just a dream character and it's living in a dream world, and the world is not really real, right? Still, that dream character at some point might conclude, well, the fact I've realized it's a dream doesn't suddenly make the dream go away. So at some point they say, well, I have to get on with living my life for as long as the dream carries on. And then the dream character might realize, well, whatever I do is not my doing. Whatever I do is part of the story of the dream in which I live. The dream character might realize, I'm not separate from the whole experience of life. That the other in the dream is not separate from the dream. And what the other does is my destiny as part of the unfolding of the dream. What I do is my destiny as part of the unfolding of the dream. The other can only function exactly according to the dream. So the other is not the doer. I am not the doer. And if the dream character actually connects to a depth, a core that is there but often is not appreciated, if they rest in their core, then they say, it doesn't matter that this is a dream. It's fine. I feel complete. And I know that destiny will unfold. And whatever happens in destiny, as in whatever happens in as far as outcomes go, I have found this connection to the core of who I am. So even the dream character in a dream has a core. A core of the dream character is the consciousness functioning through them in the dream. And they might have this realization, oh, this consciousness that is functioning through me is the consciousness of Source, which we would know as the consciousness of the dreamer in the bed. The dream character can never meet the dreamer. You know, the dream character can never look into the eyes of the dreamer and see that the dreamer has green eyes. So if the dream character has some thought, oh, I would like to become one with the Creator, or I must know the Creator, I must meet the Creator, or what I am is the Source, so I must know myself as the Source, then that becomes an expectation that simply cannot happen. Because if the person dreaming wakes up, the dream and the dream character collapse. So they can't meet. So the best the dream character can have is to find the essence functioning through them, the consciousness functioning through them, which is what everyone has. Everyone is aware of their own life experience, and if they realize, I'm only aware of the table and the chair and the other people because of consciousness that's functioning through me. And then we conclude, oh, that is the consciousness of Source. That is the consciousness that this whole experience is arising in. But in practical terms, what's most important is then to live the rest of our life understanding that whatever is happening as part of the creation, and that it's not my doing or the other's doing. And hopefully to find a connection to the core that says, I feel comfortable regardless of how the dream unfolds.
That's great. It could be said that I don't know if it was yesterday or what you were saying before is don't stop thinking, just be, and then that's easier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just get on with life, but hopefully whenever the doership and the attachment to outcome uncomfortableness comes off, remind yourself that's not that's not how life really is.
Yes.
And come back to just being.
Yes, that's major teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel.
Really, thank you. See you tomorrow, later.
Yes, thank you for dropping in. Hello, Sophie.
Hello, Roger.
Oh, hello, Sophie.
I think I am in shock. No, I will try to put my camera, but I'm not sure it's possible because I don't have a lot of... okay, no, let's do it. Okay.
You don't have to put your camera on, but nice to see you.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. What you just tell now, it's just what I want to... I wrote because I think my English is not enough good to be able to speak spontaneously, but I will try.
I understand you so far. I've always understood you.
Yes, I know. You are so lovely. Okay. When you say that it's not possible to know myself as the source, this is the worst thing I have to listen, because for me, if I am not able to know myself as a source, I have the belief that I will not be really in peace in the daily living. I think it's not possible for me to find the peace of mind in daily living if I don't have access to the mystery. I was writing something like, if I cannot understand the purpose of mystery of the source, I will not be able to be at peace ever. What I say that because actually I was more or less in peace, and I have a quite nice life. But 2 days ago, thanks to Jean-Luc, he sent me something and he just destroyed my peace. And just because we are in this coronavirus, and he sent me something and in which it was say that in France, they are, how you say that, euthanasia, like forced to die the old people because they know that they cannot receive them in the hospital because it's overcrowded. And so for any reason, when I read that, I just start to cry and to say and to feel that I don't understand this duality, and I don't understand why we have to go through this awful reality. And I start to become again as when I went with you in Australia, when I have my crisis with God, and I couldn't blame human people. I don't blame human people because I know myself as absolutely conditioned. But I say, why awareness or God or intelligence or source need to go through this kind of horrible experience? Why, so I say, if I don't understand the why, I will never be at peace, in a way. I can have a relative peace because for any reason, I have a quite good life, but deeply, when the circumstances become more hard, or if I have to imagine myself in a very bad dream where I see people killing children, or I say, I will not be ever at peace. So I don't know how to deal with that. Yeah? I have a relative peace, but I don't have, I have yes, but it depends on the circumstances still. So could you help me to understand what's happened to me?
Well, okay, so, if you find yourself in certain circumstances, the pain of that circumstance while it's happening is going to be intense. And so peace doesn't really mean that you won't feel the pain of being in a situation that is very painful. But the reality of our life is that a lot of time might be a painful situation and then it ends. And so a lot of our life is actually in non-painful situations. When you're sitting in your living room, for example, even if you saw your parent die in a very unfortunate way because they were ill, when you're watching them die, that's, the situation is very intense, and there will be sadness and maybe suffering of the psychological type. But then let's say it comes to an end, and you find yourself in much more neutral situation. So it's no point imagining your life filled with the most horrible imaginations indefinitely, because then if we imagine that, we'll say, how can I possibly be at peace with that, right? But that imagination is unrealistic in a way. We will have instances throughout the day or in our year, over a year, where something is very painful, and then we find that the rest of our life is much more neutral. And the peace comes where, when it's neutral, we drop out of the thinking of what happened in the past, in the painful situation, and we just find ourselves being here, understanding that my reality now is not having to deal with a dying parent, let's say. Now, this isn't even, what I'm saying doesn't mean you can't find yourself at peace while dealing with a dying parent. But there are going to be some very intense circumstances that will trigger either unresolved stuff, which will turn into great suffering, or it will just trigger emotional pain. But the important part is to understand that your whole life isn't going to be filled with that unless our thinking perpetuates the imagination of that situation. So when you receive that information, it creates sadness. The information is there, it creates sadness. But hopefully now, let's say, or some point soon, you can rest and find a peace with your situation as it currently stands, without a projection in your head of a terrible world outside of your actual situation.
But for this reason, I feel that this peace is a relative peace. And maybe what I am looking for, it's an absolutely peace. You know, it's for that I say, if I don't have access to the script of God, I will never be at peace, because I will not be satisfied by my understanding, by my relative understanding of life.
So
maybe I miss humility. Maybe, I don't know.
So well, it
because
could.
Of course, I know myself. Sorry. I can be aware of this aspect of my being, which is not affected by anything. I have access to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I share that with my student also, for example, when I teach Qigong, and it's a very important part. But there is a point of my need to understand deeply. It's not satisfied, and for that, I'm still a seeker, for example.
Okay, so before, when I said you can't ever know source, you said that was, very bad news, because it creates this idea that you can't ever know beyond the relative. Now, it comes down to what we call source. So the source outside of manifestation, I'm saying we can't know that, and we don't need to know that for peace of mind. If you can know the source in manifestation, that is enough for happiness or peace in daily living. And what we're really looking for is peace in daily living. So what we need to know is source in manifestation. And so the source in manifestation, the thing we can know that we can say is outside of the relative, is the quantum aspect of the human being. The aspect of the human being that is outside of the flow of life. So, if you close your eyes in meditation and you go deep inside, now you touch on to something that it is there, it is real, but you realize it doesn't have all of the characteristics of the person and the circumstance. And it's that aspect of the human being that we can also call source. In fact, we can say that is the source of Sophie. That is Sophie's source. Because if that beingness is switched off, Sophie doesn't exist. So then we can say, that is my source. So if we're looking for our source, and what I mean by our means the outward expression, the personality, and if we're looking for the personality source, that is it. The beingness is our source. And so when we rest there, it can cut off the thinking. And really, it's only the thinking that causes the problem. So if there is a thought that says, I need to know why this happened, why is life like that? That thinking is the problem. That thinking will never find a satisfactory answer. That thinking needs to fall away. And if the question why falls away, we find there's no problem. So that question why is really what causes the need for, so we'll say, I need to know source in order to know why. So it's a conceptual answer we've come up with. We've told ourselves what the answer to the question is. I have this question why. I'm suffering because of the question why. So I need to be able to connect to source to find out why. And if we see that the uncomfortableness is the uncomfortableness is deeper down, and the question comes out of that, and then we come up with an answer, or what we think will be the answer. If the question why falls away, then you're just left with life and a connection to your source. And we really will find that's enough. I don't feel like I need to know why anymore. But as long as the question remains why, then there will be a sense of dissatisfaction, because the question itself has a dissatisfaction in it.
So it's very clear. Thank you, Roger. But why I have this why I cannot let it go. It's like an obsession in me.
Well,
I think you know that.
I would suggest that it's because locked away in the system, the pain that exists in life has been experienced at some point in the past in a very personal way. And so then whenever there is the reminder in the external world, the reminder of the unfairness of life, of the pain of life, what gets triggered is the personalness that has been locked away in the past experience of pain. And that personalness, which is sort of an unresolved energy of me, right, which in itself is a disconnection from our source, that can't not ask why. It has to ask why, because the pain is very personal. And so that will change because of a combination. If your destiny includes a looking at this, a seeing that the pain that you see in life, the unfairness of elderly people being left to die because there's not enough ventilators. If you see that unfairness in life triggers inside you a sense of unfairness that is very personal, that can become part of the exploration into, what is at the root of that energy that is locked away. And at the same time, there also needs to be a movement in the other direction, which is a dropping out when possible. So not that you do it, but maybe there are times when there is a dropping out of the suffering, out of the question why, and dropping into the beingness, and realizing that in that dropping into the beingness, which is a connection to the self, the question doesn't arise. And because the energy is still in the body, you'll probably find, getting dragged out and then asking why again. And so there will be this movement backwards and forwards, and at least each time you rest in this beingness, you might get a sense that the question is the problem, and not necessarily look for an answer, but look for the end of the question. And because I mentioned the question is coming from, and that question why has to exist while the unresolved energy of what is really personal doership and attachment that was locked in place a long time ago because of a experience of life that just was received by the doer and the attachment to outcome. Until that shows itself and is dissolved. Now, whether it dissolves because it comes into the consciousness, into your conscious awareness, and you can feel that event from the past, or whether it dissolves in a mysterious way, some insight that happens, and then we find that energy has dissolved mysteriously. One way or another, the energy needs to resolve itself, which really means the belief in doership and attachment to outcome, which means the identity that has taken the past event so painfully, so personally. Some insight needs to happen that releases that, where it's seen to have been impersonal. So I'll finish off with, unless you have another question you have, but an explanation that might help in seeing it as impersonal, because in a way what you were saying is you have this anger towards God for creating life this way. And that might be in place because of a belief that we have, an image of God, right? So there's many teachings that talk about God as the creator, for example. So then we say, well, I want to have a word with this God creator because look what he's done, So if we can change, if our idea of God changes, then maybe we can see that there's no point in talking to God, because actually he didn't do it. God didn't create this consciously. So, shall I? Well, I'll give you a description of how we might consider God. God as pure potentiality, right? Creative potentiality, infinite creative potentiality, but not creative potentiality or God as a entity that says, what shall I create today? Right? That's sort of how we might imagine God if we say God is pure, infinite creative potentiality, and the God created life. Then we might imagine God as an entity that says, what shall I create today? Oh, I'm going to create life on earth, and I'm going to include suffering, and I'm going to make this person kill this person, and the whole story of life. Whereas the description of God as source, creator, infinite creative potentiality really is pointing at something very different. It's not pointing at a conscious God that decides, but rather it's saying that is manifestation, creativity in its latent form, in its potential form. And it moves, but it moves not in a way that God chooses, but rather it just turns into something. It turns into creation. And God only knows what it turns into when it turns into creation, and God then experiences it through each of us. When God turns into the creation, the whole thing, and we know that there is the experience of life through you and through me. And if we realize God is experiencing life through you and through me in all of the fine detail that we know. So when you felt sad, that was God's experience. So your experience is God's experience. God isn't inflicting pain on Sophie or Sophie's friends, or God has turned into the whole thing and didn't choose what creation was going to be here. So it's a mystery, even to God, what is created. Once it's created, God gets to experience it. God as the victim and the perpetrator. If our perception of God can change, then we realize, oh, I am an expression of God. I am an expression of God's experience of life, and God is experiencing it through me. And we realize there is no God to hate. The God that I hate, the God that I want to speak to and ask him, why did you do this? Doesn't exist. It exists as a concept that is part of the creation. So the creation happened, we are part of the creation, and sometimes we have a concept of a God that we are afraid of, a God that will judge us, right? That's just a concept of a God. We might have a concept of a God that created all of this, and so I want to have a talk to that God. And if our concept of God can readjust, which means it was destiny, it was part of the creation for it to readjust, we might say, there really is no God for me to hate. And that leaves us with knowing God in the manifestation, because God has become the manifestation. So where do we find God in the manifestation? We need to know God in the manifestation. If we realize that God in the manifestation is functioning through me, as me, that the consciousness looking out of my eyes is the best I can know of God. And maybe there is no God. Maybe there is just Roger, and I need to know the source of Roger, and the source of Roger is the consciousness. Without that consciousness, Roger collapses. If the body is given an injection that can suppress consciousness or remove consciousness, which means consciousness is no longer actively functioning through the body, then what happens is there's the complete collapse of the experience of life, the complete collapse of the outward expression of, oh, I am Roger. So Roger, who wants to know its source, really just needs to know the consciousness on which the experience rests. And that, I suggest, is the best we can know of source. And in fact, when we rest there deeply, it's enough, more than enough, for our peace of mind.
I have a question about that, actually, because do you think it's possible to experience the I amness, we are without register the experience of Sophie at the same time. Can we? For me, it seems to me impossible to know myself as I am without Sophie.
Well, the meditation is the activity that allows that to happen most, I guess you could say, because especially if it's a closed eye meditation, and then there is a presence with the experience that is there. The first thing we can register in meditation is there is no visual world. There is no body, no fingers, no hand, no legs. So if attention with our eyes closed in meditation can turn into that space, right? Without the residual self-image of the external world. What that means, without the residual self-image means without thought that is in a way reminding us, oh, there is a world outside of me and I am just sitting in a room with my eyes closed. So the more present we get with the present moment and realize that all of these thoughts can have a very strong effect on the experience. So simply the thought that says, oh, I have just closed my eyes and I'm sitting in a room and the world is out there, is a thought that can keep us away from a deep meditation for a whole lifetime, simply because we don't realize that that thought is still running. So becoming very present with the meditation space means not even entertaining any thought that tells us how life actually is. Not believing any thought that comes from the past, let's say, or talks about the past. Because in the present moment, there is, with eyes closed in meditation, there is no evidence of the world that our thinking tells us exists. So the more deeply we can turn inwards, which really means the more deeply we turn into this space that often we just assume is, oh, I just have my eyes closed, right? And often we don't keep our eyes closed for more than a second or half a second. We just blink. And so the inner world is there for a millisecond and then we're just back to the outer world, which is why at some point a sitting still and closing eyes becomes so important, where we realize when I close my eyes, I've exited the world. The world has exited. The world has disappeared. It has dissolved. And what I'm left with is access to the inner space. And so we need to hopefully find an appreciation for that inner space. And why we might not know I am independent of Roger or Sophie is because some form of thinking about what Roger is remains in the meditation space. Some form of thinking about the past and the future, what we need. And if the thinking gets less and less and less, the visual experience of life gets less and less and less. The sensory input is registered as not actually telling me, if we feel a sensation, our intellect might say, oh, that is, my back on the wall. And as soon as the sensation is registered as my back on a wall, without us realizing, the external world has become maintained in the meditation, which really means Sophie exists in the meditation because it's Sophie's back against the wall. Whereas if it just gets registered as an indistinct sensation, and if we don't label it as the back on the wall, then the experience of Sophie gets less and less and less. So Sophie really is layers of experience. The body is a big one. As soon as you close your eye, your body is gone. A large part of the body experience, which is the visuals, are gone. And then the physical sensations that tend to define the body, we need to see it. It's just a sensation. I don't know where the back starts. If I don't think about a back, and I'm just really present with the sensation, it doesn't tell me anything about an outside world and a body. And then our thinking, as that drops, all of this happens more and more as the inner attention is focused on the spaciousness that is there and is just aware of the vast emptiness. As the personality parts, the body parts, the thoughts parts of Sophie dissolve or get quieter and quieter, what we find exists in that space is presence. There is awareness. An awareness prior to any thought. And it's at that point that we might know I amness or awareness independent of Sophie. Because we might see our Sophie is just a whole lot of layering of experience objects on top of that impersonal I amness and awareness. So once this turning inwards, this meditating where we know a world which has no form to it, a world made up, really, when you're in that space, it is formless. There are no edges, there are no tables or chairs or planets, or there is just formless eternity and infinity, and the sense of existence and awareness. So as we can turn into it more and more regularly, that's where we find peace, because the thinking about what happened yesterday, what will happen tomorrow, all of that's based on the existence of Sophie. So if we come to know our inner space, sort of free of the personality, the more we rest there, the less of the personal suffering is there. And then we can open our eyes again and go back out into living with a connection to that space. A connection to the core. So we can say, oh, here's Roger, the body. And I know that the core of Roger is that I amness. So when we get information that triggers us, we'll feel the suffering, because that's what has kicked in, and then we might remember, let me just come back to the present moment, and you can either close your eyes, and then all of that emotion can dissolve, or with your eyes open, you can just come back to the stillness, where the thinking can subside.
Yes, it's very interesting because actually I have a quite easy access to this kind of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But I realize, listening you, that just the only thing I have to, how you say, to drop, it's the habit to link this formless experience I have
Mm-hmm.
with the name Sophie. I still label it Sophie.
Mm.
And actually Sophie is just an habit, but because it's very easy for me actually now to just feel a field of vibration and formless and very peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I can lead my student in this. But I realize, thanks to you, that I put the name Sophie to that.
Mm.
Like an habit, instead of say, and I have to make a work about that, because it's not only, I think it's more that the label, but there is something to, I don't know if you understand what maybe you don't understand because it's not that clear for me, but I can touch something very important thanks to this dialogue with you today. I don't know how I will deal with that, but the experience, it's already here. It's just a label, maybe. You understand?
Yeah, I do.
Label.
That's, this is why a label can, until we see it, or not only a label, but a thought of some sort, can include in it a whole history. And we might not realize that that is in the meditation space, one little thing. And if we see it, and it falls away, the meditation space, well, whatever it is, that the small thing falls away can make a very big difference. So if there is some sense of that being Sophie, just or a thought that says, this is Sophie, rather than recognizing this is formless, this has no age, it has no gender, it has no name, and this is my source. And it can be just something as simple as that, a recognition. That
like you said to Isabel, when you say, what do you know about the past if you don't have the memory, and if the memory was just a program to put in place? And it's the same thing, what you know about Sophie if you don't have the story,
Yeah.
It's something like that. Yeah. So we don't trust the present, we just leave the present with all the background that we rehearse, or we seems to rehearse. So okay, I just stop now because I want the other people to have the opportunity to speak. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you,
Thank
Sophie.
you so much.
Thanks for dropping in.
To you.
Hello.
Hi, Roger.
Hello. Who?
How are you?
I'm very good. And you?
Okay. I'm okay, but I actually wanted to ask you. I would, want to ask more questions that are about getting to know the real self. But right now, it's quite contrary to that. I would rather want to ask you about the practical part of, daily living and having the peace in the daily living, since that's what this teaching points to. But I was observing, like last night when I was getting ready to sleep, switched off the lights and I'm in bed, and suddenly well, I mean, in that moment, the intensity was sudden. The emotion itself isn't sudden; it's like underlying. It's there, and I'll tell you what the emotion is first, and then I'll ask you the question. Um, Something about this moment, practically right now, since we're in the lockdown, and I mean, I'm staying on my own right now in the lockdown. So maybe I don't know if the background, there's a story, but whatever the emotion is there when it comes up, it feels not like something I can just look at and say, okay, this is it, and this is just psychological, and this is just a story. No, it has, um, the feeling is very much there, and it doesn't feel like there's a me that's standing apart from it and that's observing it.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, let's say, right now, it's not so much, obviously, in this moment, but like, it's almost sometimes it's disappointing that why should an emotion like that be there? Why should it come up? Why is it there? But the why part isn't so important, because then it's like having a thought about a thought. So that part we just leave it aside completely and be at peace with the fact that this is coming up. But the emotion itself isn't like, it feels like this is not, I don't know how to put it in words, but maybe it's not fine the way it is.
Mm.
And so then suddenly, maybe because I've been listening to this teaching, I thought, what is it that, I'm like not accepting things just the way they are. So, I just heard a sentence in the back of my head, like, you're not accepting, is it that you're angry with life? Because I'm not angry, but it's just not being able to, like when you're waking up in the morning and you don't feel like getting up and you turn around and go back to sleep, and a couple of times over. So it feels like, okay, there is you don't feel like getting up. There's a sadness, partly because of that underlying emotion which was there, the previous night and for a while. And that has to do with, like even in a situation like this, and also for like difficult situations, um, it just feels like I can't put a label and say that, okay, this is an expectation and I shouldn't have an expectation. It just feels, the feeling is there, like, let's say with intimate family, knowing that, okay, they know certain details, and in spite of that, there hasn't been like a call or anything about it. So it just felt like, does it really have to be so extreme? Is a person, fine because there is a spiritual exploration and one wants to live in that way? Does it mean we can't be with people or like very intimate relationships in your life, like your family, your mother, and with things like that? If you have a feeling like, why does it have to be so extreme that there's complete cutoff or whatever there is? But I'm more concerned about why should it have any impact on me. And I'm not bogged down with the why so much as the fact that the impact is there.
Mm. So I would suggest that it's important to really feel, because often we might not realize that we're not really allowing that feeling to be there. We have a judgment about it, maybe even because of the teaching. We might think this shouldn't be here because it's suffering. And in that case, we're not really allowing it. We're not honoring it. We're not really just letting it be. And letting it be might be allowing it to intensify without a judgment on ourselves that says, no, you can't, you shouldn't feel this. So I think there's a great liberation to allow emotions to be there and allow ourselves to be overtaken by the emotion, to allow us to be vulnerable, allow ourselves to feel hurt at the fact that family might not have called to check on how you are, right? So if the feeling is, I'm underappreciated, I'm ignored, I'm not worthy, if that feeling is there, then notice if there is a maybe an unconscious judgment of it, an unconscious expectation that things be different, that you don't feel that way. And if we see that, there could be the dropping of an unconscious resistance to it that we didn't even realize. And then it might flower. We might find that I've been preventing myself from being emotional as a defense mechanism that I thought was good, because it's too painful to feel emotional. And it could just be an idea we have that says, this is good to not be emotional. I have to be strong. What the others think about me is not important. So those ideas, which actually are part of spiritual teachings, because it's important to show that sometimes our suffering is very involved in what the others think about us. But if they then become shoulds and shouldn'ts in a way that prevent us from feeling an energy that is there, then a judgment has come in about that energy.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood what you said right now. So if you could explain a little more of that. And I think it's not so much about being appreciated or undermined. It's more the feeling of, I don't know if it's sadness or something like that. I feel like, is it necessary? That isolation is really, this much of isolation is it required for, because a lot of times, even in spiritual teachings, it says that, situation has manifested in this way, or different teachings, and different ways of saying it. That it's for your own, inner awakening. And a lot of times I do see that aspect of it. I don't know how to exactly relate it to, the sadness, because the sadness is there. Yeah. So I don't think it's so much, like why or why not. It just feels like it's maybe I don't know if it's too much or something like that. So the happiness is not there, and then you have to look at it in the light of what you're hearing. And sometimes you just have to be with it, with the emotion. I'm not trying to run away from being with the emotion, and I'm not trying to not feel it because it's uncomfortable or anything like that. But it's not letting me, I'm just observing. I'm able to, there is some awareness of the fact that, you wake up in the morning and you're going back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it doesn't feel like I'm really upset and I'm doing it on purpose or anything like that. I may be trying to label it that this is one of the reasons, that this has the underlying sadness is there. But there is some reason why I'm labeling it as that, because there is an understanding of the situation.
So how about actually you just stop trying to just see it as a happening. So if you see yourself going to sleep, it doesn't need to be labeled any more than that. If you see yourself feeling sad, see it all as a happening, meaning your destiny unfolding in that hour of that day. If there is sadness, see it as sadness arising, sadness happening. That's what the teaching is really showing us or asking us, describing that our true essence is that of non-doership, which really means whatever happens through us, whatever thoughts arise, whatever feelings arise, are witnessed as a happening and not my doing.
So what I'm trying to say is that when you think of it this way, you're somewhat okay with it then, right?
No, you don't even need to be okay with it, because if what's happening in that moment is not okayness, then witness the not okayness as a happening. The teaching is not saying you need to control your life so that there is okayness. The teaching is saying if it's destined for there to be not okayness in the moment, that's what will arise. And it's not saying there is a solution to that. It's saying in each moment, everything is a happening according to God's will, not your will.
Okay, I'll have to put the phone on the charger so the video might disappear because the battery is shutting off and it's cutting your sound off. Yeah. But you can hear me fine, right?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Okay. When I said okayness, I mean like peace. When we're referring to peace as in daily living, so I don't feel that the peace with it. Like I'm not at
Yeah,
peace
but
with that
peace
feeling.
peace is not most people's destiny. So in a particular moment when there is no peace, hopefully there can be a realization, oh, what is happening now, God's will arising in this moment, is suffering, not peace.
So if it feels like something needs to be done about it, or it's okay to have, just talk to people, and that needs, I don't know. Then does that mean one is not at peace with it? It's a little. I'm not clear on it. Yeah.
So allow life to unfold. If you feel like talking to someone, talk to someone. It sounds like there is someone trying to say, understand how life should be. Should I be at peace? If I'm at peace, will I call someone or will I just sit on my own? And there isn't an answer of how life should be. Life will be. And what this is suggesting is the attitude of seeing life as it is in each moment, with no expectation that it is different. Which really just means, what I'm suggesting is, if you feel sad, allow the sadness to be there. If you can't allow the sadness to be there, then see that there is a resistance to the sadness. If an idea comes up that says, I wonder how I should be, or what I could do, what attitude I could have to make this situation more peaceful, observe that thinking as the happening in the moment. Everything that happens, including your thoughts and your feelings, is the unfolding of life, moment after moment after moment. And the witness is, in a way, outside of involvement in that. And so even if there is involvement, the witness can witness the involvement. But I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying whatever is happening in life is a happening. That's the description. So you might find yourself seeing your thinking, seeing your feelings, seeing your emotions as the happening in that moment. Nothing to do about them.
Well, if something is dysfunctional, right? If you can see that it's heading towards that,
Mm-hmm.
like certain things need to be done, if there are medicines, you need to wake up at a certain time so that you're able to take them according to the doctor. Personally, I don't have too much of an opinion about that. But okay, this is what, you're told that this is what you have to do with the medicines. Or so if you can see that the situation is, well, I can let it be. I can just let things be and let them unfold how it feels natural if these, let's say, other factors are not there. But here I'm not clear.
Well, I'm saying why not take the medicine if that's what happens? Because so if the body takes the medicine because the doctor said to take the medicine, then what I'm suggesting is that's what's destined, and there can be a witnessing of that happening. So if you remain asleep and you don't take the medicine, then there can be a witnessing once waking up happens. Oh, it was destiny for me to sleep past the destined, or to sleep past the time I was meant to take the medicine. And just see, oh, that's what happened. If you have a thought that says, I don't want to take the medicine, witness the thought. If you have a feeling of sadness and feel I want to speak with someone, all of that, there isn't a right way or a wrong way for life to unfold. It's just unfolding.
Yeah, it's there's a little differences in perspective, especially like you said, from the top-down teachings, where you are trying to be aware that you're just the awareness, and you really have to let things be or unfold as they will. So that part is almost the same, right? We let.
Yeah, sure. Witness everything as a happening. The doer wants life to be, different. It wonders, what should I do in this moment? So if we understand life is, if we start to be open to the concept that life is a story unfolding, predetermined story unfolding, then the question is, okay, so how do I live my life if life is a predetermined story? And the answer is, in each moment, do whatever you think or feel to do. And witness whatever happens through you, in other words, whatever you think or feel to do, as a happening, as part of the unfolding of the story. So there's two sides to it. Witness what happened, or what happens, and before it happens, do whatever you think or feel to do, which is part of the happening.
So it's like, I feel like you said this is what you said earlier as well, right? About this point, or is this like an additional state point?
Well, before I was saying, if you want, often we get in the way of our emotions. We have defense mechanisms to them, which is essentially another form of not allowing things to happen. There is a psychological idea that I should be strong, for example, or I shouldn't feel emotional. And that idea can get in the way of the emotion really having its full force, its full space. So I was, because you were saying I'm not sure what the emotion is, I was suggesting, well, if you just allow the emotion to be there, which will only happen if you recognize, oh, there's this part of me that is resisting the emotion. There's this part of me that says it shouldn't be there. So in the moment, if that falls away, you might find that the emotion gets more intense than it has previously. And then you might see what the emotion really is, because it has presented itself in a more intense fashion. And it's not really so important about seeing what the emotion is. It's just about seeing, wow, in this moment, emotion is happening.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm stopping any emotion, and so I think that's not the problem. I just feel like it's putting a standstill to things that I'm required to do. And so, is there a role here? And I know that would be the doer in this case, if we see it in that light, like something needs doing, and it's not being done, and you can just see that it's kind of going that way. So your common sense would say, okay, well, something needs to be done here, but
why not do
isn't
it?
that doership?
No, doership is the attitude that sees whatever the body is doing as my doing. So if the body says, oh, I need to close the window, allow the body to close the window. That's not doership. That's doership would be watching the body go to the window and saying, well, this is me, and I'm the one in control of all of life. Right? The attitude of non-doership sees the body get up, go to the window, close the window, and then sit down again. And it sees all of that as a happening according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning and the circumstance you found yourself in. And sees, I couldn't have done it differently. And
right. So when you say the body needs to get up and close the window, I think I see what the confusion is, because it feels like that would still the clarity that that's the body and not the psychological identity that wants to do something. It's in some cases it's not very clear. There's a very thin line. In some cases it's very obvious. Like that something is very physical and body related. Like this is hot or this is cold, and some your thoughts or your story. So that's psychological. But some things are not that clear. So how would you clarify that?
Well, even the psychological is still a happening according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning. So whatever it is that moves you, whether it's the biological or the psychological, you can still witness it as a result of your genes and up-to-date conditioning. So the principle is the same. Just witness the movements that are there. So if you get up and go and have some chocolate and you're wondering, is this the biological or the psychological? It doesn't matter. It's you can see that is what is happening. And both the biological and the psychological are part of the story of life unfolding. And seeing everything that happens through the body, all of the feelings that arise through the body, from this new perspective that is, oh, this is not me doing it, but rather this is thought arising, emotion arising, action arising. And that recognition, which has the recognition is on the basis that, the thought arises because of my makeup, my genes and up-to-date conditioning. So once that's intellectually understood, essentially I am a machine that produces outputs, thoughts, emotions, feelings, actions. And then the attitude of non-doership is watching all of those outputs and says, oh, look, that's the output of the biological and the psychological individual. That's it. There's that's the attitude of non-doership. To see everything. The questions happening now are happening according to your genes and up-to-date conditioning. The answers that I'm giving now are answers coming out based on the circumstance, which includes your question, and then an answer that comes out based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning. And there is a witnessing. There is an awareness that whatever I say is a happening. I'm being lived. If I clap my hands now, I see, oh, something is living me to clap my hands. And if you have a certain thought in this moment, witness it, that thought arising as a result of the circumstance you find yourself in, which includes me clapping my hands. And all of it, none of it is your doing or my doing. The whole thing is a show unfolding.
So who's the one that will say, oh, okay, this is just this, like you said, the last few statements, you said, we'll be able to say, oh, this is just a happening and this is just arising.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that says that?
That is a combination of the awareness that is aware of the happening and the working mind that has registered whatever happens is a result of the very complex biological and psychological instrument. And the working mind has to see that that biological instrument is part of life. It came out of life. No one created it. Who created the body? It just appeared as a microorganism, and it grew. And now it's functioning. And if the working mind, which is part of that organism, if the working mind clicks, I didn't create myself. My parents didn't create me, even. They were the mechanism by which the organism came into existence, but they had no control over how I turned out. I just grew. I'm a machine. We're all machines that have grown a particular way. And so whatever happens through us, which is the entirety of our life experience, is all life happening. So that's the working mind that will say everything is a happening, because the working mind has seen, like literally seen it. It's the description clicks, and it sees it, and it sees, wow, what I thought was me as a separate independent entity is just a biological instrument, a very complex biological instrument, functioning like a cookie machine spitting out cookies. The cookie machine spits out cookies according to its design, right? It doesn't choose what sort of cookies it spits out. And we are just a very complex cookie machine spitting out outputs.
Right. So, of course, we can't say it's a goal because, that would again be a doing, but somewhere we listen to spiritual teaching for that realization to sort of set in of what you just said, to realize that this is just a cookie machine and this is just happening. And you don't have a doing for that realization, you don't have to try for that realization to set in, and you don't have to feel, okay, this stuff is still there, or, I shouldn't, whatever. Like none of that is needs any doing.
No, because there's never been a doer. There's only ever been a machine functioning. So if someone explains, some mathematics to you, they explain 3 + 3, or when you're learning mathematics, the machine either gets it or it doesn't get it, right? And if it gets the concept of addition and multiplication and division and then maybe algebra and trigonometry, if we understand it, it's because the machine got it, right? And the concept that you are a very complex machine, I'm a very complex machine, and we're all functioning exactly according to our design, and we had nothing to do with our design. Life determined our design. That's the concept. It's not a hard concept, really. And if it clicks, and we realize I've always considered me as an autonomous entity in control of how I think and how I feel, in control of what actions I take. And I've always seen the other in control of what they think and what they feel and what actions they take. And it just clicks. I've seen life and interpreted life completely through the lens of personal doership, which turns out, according to this concept, to be a completely inaccurate assessment of how life really works. So in a particular moment, now, if you want, why not do it now? Go, I get it. I simply cannot be the doer. Everything is a happening through me. This thought, getting it, is a happening, not my doing. That's why you can't choose to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Roger.
Pleasure. Thank you for dropping in again. We'll talk again sometime next week, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it looks like we're over time today, but I think maybe tomorrow, well, I'll see. We'll either do question and answers again, or if a specific topic comes up, then I'll surprise you. So thank you for joining, everyone, and I hope you'll join again tomorrow.